I'm very excited today to welcome as my guest my friend Gino Yu, and I'm very honored to have you here on the show. Dr. Gino Yu is an associate professor and director of digital entertainment and game development at the School of Design at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. His amazing work draws connections from neuroscience, developmental and humanistic psychology, phenomenology, epistemology, combined with Eastern philosophical practices. He's world renowned for his work in consciousness, digital entertainment, and leadership, guided by his love of the arts. And he's spoken at international festivals including TED, the Cannes Lion Festival, and the World Knowledge Forum. His main areas of research focuses on the application of media technologies to cultivate creativity and promote enlightened consciousness. He's also founded the Asia Consciousness Festival and has hosted Science of Consciousness conferences all over the world. Welcome, Gino. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we're able to continue this. Had a wonderful conversation with you this morning when we were supposed to
Yes.
do this interview. And I'm able to, glad that conversation was really exciting and really happy
Mhm.
to be here now to kind of do what we're supposed to do this morning and kind of continue this conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. But what was beautiful about what happened this morning, which was the original time for our interview, was that we connected in total presence and
Yeah.
allowed the emergence to happen, which is so much of part of the work that so much of the work that you do. And but before we even get into that, I'd love to ask you this question. I've known you for a number of years, but I never got the story as to how you went from studying electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley to unlocking the mysteries of the science of consciousness.
Well, so it was what happened was my background's actually in computer science, electrical engineering, computer science. I did a bachelor's at Berkeley, and then I did my PhD there too in electrical engineering, computer science, focusing on VLSI CAD. In that, we write software to design hardware. And in the year 1989, I had three papers accepted to different conferences around the world. One to a conference in Tokyo, one a month later in Nanjing, China, and one a month after that in Munich, Germany. And at the time, this was in 1989, uh, there was an airline called TWA that had this offer where you could fly around the world. And as long as you kept going in the same direction, you could do unlimited flights. And so I convinced my
Mhm.
advisor that it was cheaper to get a round the world in one direction ticket than three separate round trip tickets. And so I ended up in Tiananmen Square on June 20th, 1989, which was
Wow.
about 2 weeks after. But then I went diving in Truk Lagoon. I was in Guam, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Egypt, through the Middle East and through Europe up to Scandinavia and Thailand. It just had this amazing trip. And wherever I went, you'd meet people. And so I did that trip. And then B, I was a starving student, so I only had $1,000 cash and no credit card. And I ended up doing this trip for 4 months. And I noticed that wherever you went, you had people with different cultures, different backgrounds, and everything. But if you make eye contact and just a couple of gestures, you're able to connect with people in a fairly deep way, fairly quickly as well. That was, and so the thing that led the curiosity from me for that was, what's the commonality in man? And so wherever you go,
Mhm.
everyone, whoever you are, everyone's born, everyone dies, and while they are alive, they have to deal with themselves. And so part of that is kind of making sense of the world and you know catching up to modern society and consensus reality and a lot of the things that inhibit us from connecting are these kind of beliefs that we create that then create barriers that prevent us from communicating openly, with one another and all of these things. And you notice if there is a psychological wall, if you show them one side and the other side, and then the wall collapses, and then you can kind of connect in a deeper way. And so I really investigated this, and when after I went back to Berkeley, I did my office hours at Cafe Milano and Cafe Strada, cafes near Berkeley. And I would just talk to people and just try to get a sense of them and everything, and just really explore, this mentally constructed worldview that kind of contains all people and kind of frames their experience of the moment. And then that led to, so there was that I learned. And then the other thing I learned from that is, as long as you're kind of open, uh, with only $1,000 cash, and, you bump into people, and, everything always works out. And so when you really throw yourself to the wind and then really just kind of go for it, a lot of really wonderful things happen. Things that you couldn't have possibly planned just kind of happen. And kind of there's a wonder that happens from that. And both of those were really, I mean, those are the main things, although I have a PhD, those are the main things that really uh, shaped my life, actually. And what
Mhm.
happened was, in 1992, I had an awakening experience, with all of this investigation, and, things got kind of surreal, and, the subjective and the objective come together. I didn't know what it was. And so our whole family after that started doing qigong, and so did that practice, and this whole awakening thing, I didn't know what it was at all. And so I just continued on. I taught at USC. I helped to put the multimedia program in the engineering school there. I got married and everything. And then 10 years later, my sister had a Vedanta teacher and ran a workshop in North Carolina. And so she invited me to it. And, I went to the workshop and kind of attended it. And they started explaining all of this stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, I know this stuff from this thing that happened 10 years ago. I was like, that was real. And then that kind of shifted. And then from that, I shifted from digital entertainment to really looking at consciousness. And it took a while. In 2006, I went to my first Tour de Science of Consciousness conference. And then that's the conference that I hosted in Hong Kong. And then after that, kind of gradually kind of ease my way into really moving into this area, and then really looking at it. And what I do in terms of the approach that I have is really looking at things from the perspective of science, and from the perspective of my background. And the metaphor here is in engineering. Right now, I'm actually sitting in my kind of basement, and I'm talking to my computer, and I'm seeing you. And all of this is happening mediated through a computer. And in a computer, there's hardware, and then there's software that's running on the hardware. And arguably, your body's in New York, my body is here in Hong Kong, and our bodies are like the hardware. And your experience of this moment is kind of like a software, and there's a relationship between the hardware of the physiology and the neurophysiology and your experience of this moment. And so if I mention, I don't know, if I mention, let's see, the Empire State Building in New York, and if you know what I mean, are there certain neurons in my brain that are now wired like yours? So what's the relationship between this mental space and the physical body? And so that's kind of the approach that I take towards it. And, with this, and with the investigation of a lot of different people in this space, we've come up with a kind of a model of development. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then lately, especially with COVID, has been really looking at, with this model, and, with this time to reflect. Normally I'm on the road doing a lot of different things and speaking and meeting people, but I
Mhm.
haven't traveled in over a year. And this time has really uh, provided an opportunity to reflect on, what have I been doing for these last, years. And, I'm actually, it's 10 minutes now. I'm 57 now.
Happy
And
birthday,
so,
Gino.
thank you. And so really looking at kind of the next phase, the next slash last phase of life, looking at, what is it I'm really here to do and everything. And so that reflection has kind of uh, led me to think about kind of humanity and society, and really looking at um, thinking of things from the perspective of personal development, and looking at potentially
Mhm.
systems that kind of humanity needs that modern society doesn't yet provide. And so I kind of wrote some stuff up that I've been sharing with some people, and it's really looking at
Yes.
kind of, it'll probably be, it's definitely what I'll be doing for the rest of my life. just kind of
And
trying to put
thank you
these
for sharing.
systems in place. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. You know, I've been actually looking through a lot of what you've been presenting through the years, and you know, you've gone and really explored the mind body relationship, and actually have come up with such an amazing way to explain to people, you know, how consensus reality is formed, how it can be broken through in a way, and really the path to coming to this inner joy of being, which you talk about a lot through presence and through breaking open a lot of the stories that we have about our world and about ourselves. You have a model called the 5 stages of consciousness development process. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, so what I did with you this morning, which was more kind of
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one, and
Right.
I look at things, and here part of the challenge is when you talk about consciousness, there are a lot of people that have different interpretations, and what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean, scientists, and what is this, and the philosophers and religious people all have kind of different interpretations and representations. And so the idea is to find something that's kind of consistent with Western science, but then also kind of is consistent with the Eastern philosophies and with the theistic religions and everything as well too. And so I look at it things from the perspective of awareness and from the
Mm-hmm.
perspective of reductionist materialism. And wherever you go, and again, if you look at phenomenology as kind of the software and physiology as hardware, and really look at the relationship of phenomenology and your experience of this moment. Right now, for most people, if you look at physiology as hardware, all there is to everything in the universe at any one time is literally just what's physically around you. So I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
in this basement right now. There's how your body feels, the internal processes of hunger, thirst, having to go to the bathroom. There are certain things that you become aware of
Mm-hmm.
related to physiological processes and sensations, from interoceptive awareness, being aware of what's happening within your body. And there's what you know from the conditioned mind and thought. And from the perspective of awareness, looking at it from the awareness and kind of a
Mm-hmm.
non-dual perspective, all there is just that. And everything in the entire universe falls into one of those 3 categories. It's either something kind of from the conceptual mind, there are the internal sensations in the body, and there's what's physically around you. And so if I say that there looks like there's a sofa behind you with a blue pillow on it, from my perspective here, does that sofa and blue pillow exist? Stephanie,
From my
is there a blue
perspective, it
pillow?
does.
Yeah.
Yes,
How
there
do you
is.
know that
Mm-hmm.
pillow exists?
I know because I can touch and feel it and see it and smell it
Yeah.
and taste
And
it
so
if I
you know
wanted
it
to.
kind of from your senses. Yeah.
Yes.
Right now, does I don't know, does Europe exist?
That only exists in my concept of it at the
Well, yeah,
moment.
so it's in this mental space. So I'm just saying that
Right.
everything in the entire universe is in one of those 3 categories at any
Right.
one moment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
true from the perspective of your awareness, but that's also true for if you look at every cell in your body. So if I look at this cell in my body right now, what's influencing this cell? There's the external environment that's impinging
Mm-hmm.
upon the cell. There's the internal
Mm-hmm.
processes of the cell nucleus and everything that's happening within the cell, the cytoplasm. And then if I consciously decide to move my arm, it will influence this cell, right? From this
Right.
cell in a materialistic way. What else is influencing that cell right now? Arguably nothing. And that's true for every cell in your body. And so there's what's around it physically, there's the internal processes of the cell, and somehow your conscious mind is able to influence it as well too. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
true from your awareness, and that's true for every cell in your body. And so the 5 stages, it turns out that when you're born, there is no symbolic consciousness, and there is no notion of object permanence. If you take a toy, I have 4 kids, if you take a toy
Mm-hmm.
and you put it behind your back, early on the baby's like, where'd the toy go? Oh, there's the toy. Where'd the toy go?
Mm-hmm.
They have no notion of object permanence. That's why peekaboo works and is so fascinating for kids. Where did
Right.
daddy go? Oh, there's daddy. Where did daddy go? And so what happens is, as we develop, consciousness becomes aware of itself, becomes aware of the physiology, the experiences in the physiology, becomes aware of the surroundings, realizes that there are objects in the surroundings, and then from that it develops kind of symbolic consciousness. And so just like in
Mm-hmm.
the material world, there was nothing and there was this big bang and all this hydrogen, becoming all the galaxies and everything. Consciousness becomes aware of itself, and you start building this mental worldview. And our experiences in space and time bind the symbols and thought to process in this mental realm to processes in physiology. And so we explore the world, we experience things, and we start trying to make sense of the world conceptually. And then gradually we start building this mental worldview and then this belief system. Then we
Mm-hmm.
act from this belief system. And so we come up with ideas, we act through the physiology engages the material world, reality responds, which influences how I feel and how I think. So I'm doing this, I've got this conceptual model of reality, and then I act upon it, and then the reality responds, which then influences how I feel and how I think. And early trauma will influence a lot of this stuff and everything. And so as I develop, I start building my mental worldview. And as I live, and usually what happens is, when a baby is born, they're born into the reality that their parents create, and then they hit, oh, thank you. And then they hit puberty, and then
Mm-hmm.
they kind of shed that worldview from their parents, and they develop a different worldview based upon their friends and everything, and the environment and the culture. And then maybe they travel around the world, and then they buy into consensus reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so stage one of development is kind of this whole process of buying into consensus reality. But then generally when people do that, they're fragmented. And so for most people, there's my work, there's my relationships, my family, my hobbies, and these are all different projections in the material world that then influence how I feel based upon how I frame things. And so if let's say I would really wanted someone to be president and they lost, or my football team lost, I feel down,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes, maybe I have a bad day at work. I go home, I make love to my girlfriend or my wife, or whatever, I call my parents or something, and I'm doing all of these different actions to maintain homeostasis in the physiology. And so your parents laid a certain pattern on you in what your body's expecting. Trauma will
Mm-hmm.
influence this significantly as well too. And then I'm just doing things not because it's right or wrong, but because it feels familiar. And so, I broke up
Right.
with my girlfriend again. I'm going to go eat chocolate ice cream and watch movies. So I'm doing all of this stuff that's regulating my affect and regulating my endocrine system and the hormones and everything that are released, just to kind of feel familiar. But I'm fragmented, and so I'll do this, and then I'll if this isn't working out, I'll do something here and I'll do
Right.
something there. And a lot of times for you with a lot of projects, it seems like I'm juggling a lot of things. Oh, I have to now service my mom because I care for her, and then I have this friend, and so a lot of people that time people are juggling this because they represent something to them and they mean something
Mm-hmm.
to them, which is kind of why they kind of invest their time and effort and all of this, and they're just trying to feel their way through based upon the initial, when they were born, there was nothing. But as they started building this worldview, all of these interests, spread out. And as a person develops, the physiology kind of moves to higher energy states. I grow, I become more capable and everything. And, I get really excited about certain things and stuff. And so the physiology develops energetically, and then the psychology develops, and it's my experiences in space and time that bind these symbols and this mental worldview to the processes of physiology. But I'm fragmented, and that's stage one,
Exactly.
generally speaking.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And
Stage two
that's
is
a
at
lot of
what?
conditioning.
Yeah, and you're trying to catch up with modern
Y-
society, because when you were born, you're basically like biblical Adam, and then you have to
Mm-hmm.
learn to pay taxes and drive a car and make money and know how the world works. And so you kind of have to catch up to all the systems that all the generations of people before you have created. And so that's generally stage one. Stage two for some people is they look at consensus reality and they're like, hey, this isn't working. They're like, to hell with this. I'm going all in on one thing. And so any true entrepreneur, any true artist, any true scientist, you have to
Mm-hmm.
leave the realm of the known. You have to leave the realm of this consensus reality that's been created by all your forefathers and all the people before you. You have to kind of find something new. And so you have to kind of leave the realm of the known. You have to go into the unknown, discover the fire, and bring that back. And when you do this, what happens is all of these different fragments of you consolidate into one, and your whole endocrine system and autonomic nervous system become coupled to your perception of this one thing. So you can remember maybe when you were working at Alchemist Kitchen, or you're all in
Mm-hmm.
on something, or it could be a company, or it could be a relationship or something. It's like, hey, I'm tied to this. And then my whole emotional system and energetic system become coupled to my perception of this one thing. And so when it goes up, hey, she likes me or he likes me and everything, I feel great. And then, oh, shoot, maybe she didn't call. What does that mean? I feel down. And so you're highly attenuated, and
Mm-hmm.
so all of these different fragments of you, before I used to do all these different things. Now I'm just thinking about this thing nonstop. I'm obsessing about this thing, and really, everything that I see, it's, hey, how can I use this to benefit my company? Or and if it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
benefit it, it's a waste of time. I'm just going to focus on this. And so what's happening is normally you have this homeostatic process and your ego kind of keeps you locked, and you're trying to break out of this. And so when you try to do something, your subconscious and everything is going to mess with you. It's like, no, let's not do it today. Or, oh, maybe I'm not good enough or something. And so you have this monkey mind playing. And it's there to keep you kind of in homeostasis. And you have to bring all of your energies and your focus and commitment. And when you focus and you really focus and, push yourself and commit yourself, and if you're open, high energy, focused, and open, surreal shit starts happening. Coincidences start happening, synchronicities start happening.
Conspiracies.
And then you kind of pop out beyond kind of the consensus reality. And then no one's ever taught you this before. And you realize that there's a reality kind of beyond the consensus reality that you've been taught. And then things get
Mm-hmm.
it can get kind of surreal. So coincidences happen, and then I try to figure it out. And then even more coincidences happen. I try to figure that out. And then I get premonitions and they start happening. And then I talk to people and then I feel like I can read their minds. I become empathic and all this other stuff. And then maybe
Mm-hmm.
lights start turning off and on, computers act weird around you and everything. And then, some people feel that they
Yes.
can control the weather, all of these things start happening. And then pretty soon they're not eating right, they're not sleeping right. And then the physiology can't maintain this energy. And if they don't have
Mm-hmm.
anyone that's been through this process around them, they'll usually end up in a psych ward or something, because they're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
and they start talking to their friends and they're like, hey, no, don't you get it? No, I can, try it. What? I
Yes.
knew you were going to do that and everything. And they're like, hey, Gino, maybe you should chill out a bit. I was like,
Yes.
no, don't you
Mhm.
get it? It's so simple. And all of these things start coming to you. And so usually what happens, if they have friends and family that care for them, they're like, and then they just are overwhelmed. They maybe start getting downloads and everything. And then they usually get,
Mm-hmm.
and then the modern society doesn't know how to deal with these people. And so they end up in a psych
Exactly.
ward on pharmaceuticals and everything. And they have a bad experience about that. And so there's usually a pop and then the crash, because they're not eating right, they're not sleeping right, and then the physiology can't maintain the state, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a crash, which is kind of a dark night of the soul kind of thing. And so that kicks you into this other stage, which you realize that the reality isn't the reality that you've been taught, isn't the consensus reality, and that there are bigger forces at work. And so, this pronoia versus paranoia and all this attitude and everything. And as you're focused, things start happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
usually the problem with people is that happens, and then they come back into consensus reality, and then the stories that used to drive them don't mean anything anymore. And they,
It
and
becomes
it's
very
a
hard to exist
challenging
in the
time
world.
because they've
Mm-hmm.
seen like a future that's really amazing. But then, this is just not, they're
But
arguing and there's conflict over simple things. And so it's very jarring to them. Um, And so it's hard. They have a hard time functioning. I think a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
people, I think, end up being homeless and and all of this because
Mm-hmm.
they really can't really support themselves because of these experiences and everything. There's this Joseph
And
Campbell quote: the psychotic drowns in the same waters that the mystic swims. And so they kind of
mm-hmm.
get a taste of this. And right now there's no support for that really. And so they're feeling their way out. But usually what happens is they come back. And so they have this consensus reality. They have this mental worldview. And the things that drive them are still kind of fear, need, and desire. And all of these stories they're still driven by the stories in their head. And so what has to happen kind of in this stage, generally speaking, is you have to decouple. And so all of my efforts and everything have created this energetic structure, within my physiology, maybe a Kundalini, connection. And so all the chakras are lined up or what have you, the Kundalini rises and I get kind of energized and everything. And I get all of these insights. But I haven't been able to, but I'm driven by kind of these fears, needs, and desires in the stories. And so the energy system in the physiology is developed, but it's still tied to these stories. And what
Exactly.
happens in this is that you have to kind of decouple the influences of the symbols on the processes of physiology. And so the energy that you get in terms of how you feel and everything relates to how you're breathing, your state of being, letting
Mm-hmm.
go, release work, letting go of early trauma, bringing forgiveness and really releasing it, not only psychologically, but physiologically as well, too. And that's called kind of
Mm-hmm.
doing the inner work, the shadow work and everything. And so it turns out that underneath all the stories, if you let go of all the stories that you've been conditioned from your entire life, at the very core of your being, arguably at the very core of everyone's being, there's an inner experience that's present within everybody. And the only way I can describe the experience with words is that right here and right now, it's good to be alive. And if you can feel that joy, wonder, gratitude, compassion, everything, and you can see it in people's eyes as well. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, and so all of my fighting and all of the concerns, oh, he's not the right one or whatever, all of those are all in relative terms. But if you look at everything in absolute terms, like physical death, most of the things that you're worried about are pretty meaningless. And so people that have had near-death experiences or awakening experiences, they kind of touch into this and surreal shit happens. Eventually everything makes sense. They see the light and it's actually reported in psychedelic experiences, in the
Mm-hmm.
bardos, in
Mm-hmm.
near-death experience and awakening experience. It's a kind of a similar pattern through all of this. And so the objective here is to decouple from all of the influences of the symbols and then to cultivate interoceptive awareness and to be able to self-regulate independent of context. So breath and realizing that your breath relates to your emotional state. And as you release, you know, it's
Mm-hmm.
really about reconnecting to this innate joy of being, developing a strong connection to that, and then decoupling from the symbols. Now, when we talk about decoupling from the symbols, some people call this ego death. And the reason why it's difficult, because all of these symbols that create this mental reality that you have use the same underlying physiological mechanisms that are keeping your body physically alive, but your awareness doesn't know the difference. So as you try to yank on this, it's going to start yanking on your energy system. And to fully
Mm-hmm.
decouple is basically, it's like, your whole reality has been, since you were born, has been baked deeply into your physiology. And it's like coming off of crack cocaine, cold
Yeah.
turkey, and your body's going to shake, all of this stuff. You're not going to know what's
And
going on. And
that's a really important point to make because people don't necessarily connect the consciousness and spiritual aspect of ourselves with the physical, and it's
yeah, and it's
completely
terrible.
tied
I
to
mean, you
physiology.
feel like,
Yeah,
all of this,
yeah.
oh my God, I've never experienced this before. And there's all this terror and everything. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the things that, I don't want to get into
And you
your
can get
personal
very
stuff,
sick.
but yeah, but depression is a
Mm-hmm.
really, that's when you decouple, because usually if you're
Oh, yeah.
driven by a mental worldview, what happens is there's a pop in the crash because you're driven by this belief and all of your energy is tied into this belief. And when that belief pops, it's kind of like a souffle. When the souffle pops, the whole energy system collapses and you're like, oh, there's no reason to get up. I was such an idiot. And oh, man, what's the point of life
Well, but what you're
anyway?
saying is actually
So what?
incredibly optimistic because it's actually giving
Well,
the context of what's happening.
yeah, so you have to go through
Yeah.
that, and then you have
Right.
to
Exactly.
reconnect to the innate joy of being. And so it's the
Mm-hmm.
inner work to reconnect to that. And so most people, I have early trauma, I can't connect to the innate joy of being. The physiology is moving to higher energy states. So I'm going to do stuff out here. I'm going to study things. I'm going to, oh no, let's go
Right.
to check that. I'm going to be an experienced
Well, it's like
junkie because I get my energy out
addictions.
here
Exactly.
versus, doing this inner. And if I
Consumerism.
can if you can connect to the innate joy of being and decouple from all the stories and let go of all the
Mm-hmm.
stories, then what wants to do something? And so that's the basis of stillness.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can connect to the innate joy
And
of being,
presence.
if you can decouple from all of the stories, if you can fully decouple, then the only thing that's left is what's physically around you and how your body feels, which is what it was like when you were a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, in Christian terms, that's what it means to be reborn, because everything that happens out here and everything that happens is by the grace of God. Allah Akbar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Salah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's in Christian and
Beautiful.
Islamic terms, but then
Mm-hmm.
that's also Buddha underneath the tree. So if you know the story of Siddhartha, he's this prince. I'm going to go try to end
The
suffering.
Bodhi
You know,
tree.
I go with
Mm-hmm.
the ascetics and these Jains, and that's not it. And finally, to paraphrase, he's like, "Fuck it, I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to get up until I figure this shit out." And so he sits
Mm-hmm.
underneath this tree, and then Mara appears, the daughters of Mara, all of these desires. The daughters, all this beauty and everything. You can imagine Donald Trump sitting there and then Mara showing up, the daughter of Mara, say, hey, if you get up now, you can be president of the United States. And I'm going, okay, just kind of getting up. But, Siddhartha is still sitting there. And then so all of these desires and all these fears come. Soldiers shoot arrows, they turn into
Mm-hmm.
flowers. He's still sitting there. And then finally Mara shows up and says, who's here to witness your enlightenment? And then he responds, the earth is here to
Touching the
witness
earth.
my enlightenment because I know the difference between what's happening coming from here versus what's coming from thought. And I can let all of this go.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to do that, then what happens is when you were born, things happen around you and you start building this mental worldview. For most people now, it's my thoughts and my beliefs. I act through their physiology. I engage the material world. Reality then responds, which influences how I feel and how I think. So I'm doing this, refining my knowledge, increasing my energy. When you fully decouple, it's back to this. You're there and you're like, hey, I feel like I'm supposed to go to this place. I don't know why, but I'm just going to go try this out. And
Mm-hmm.
something tells me I'm supposed to do this. And I don't know why. I'm just, things are happening. And so what's happening is you're letting go of this and you're refining your inner compass. So things show up and then you
Mm-hmm.
try them out and you don't know how or why you know this, but you start really exploring that. And it's a process of refining intuition, which is the mystical path. And so things happen and you start gaining insights. First time this happened, I was at a lunch. I had a car parked in Pasadena. I was near Idea Labs and it was lunch. And then these flies flew by and I'm like, oh, I think I'm getting a ticket right now. And I go out and indeed there was I was able to talk my way out of it, but something about these flies coming in just kind of told me that something was happening.
Yes.
And so you're just looking at things in a non-causal emergent way. and you're really tied into what are the emotions driving the action. And then with the integration, somatically, fear, need, and desire feel very different from joy, gratitude, and wonder. And you don't know, but you're just kind of exploring this. And that's kind of the mystical path. and then and then that's stage 4, and then stage 5 are these special abilities. And so some people are born with special abilities, but then they get suppressed when society tells them what's right
Mm-hmm.
or wrong. Some people, when they pop from stage 2 to stage 3, they develop special abilities, but their energy system isn't stable because they haven't fully let go. And when things happen, that goes, oh my god, it's happening, hey, hey, I'm manifesting. And whatever whatever's in their mind, it's still kind of driven by this fear, need, desire thing. But if you can fully decouple, and
Right.
surreal shit can happen, and it doesn't phase you at all because you know that this is just the natural way of things, then you can actually develop these gifts in a grounded and centered way. And so that's kind of the broad 5-stage model. And then related
Amazing.
to
Thanks
that
for
are
explaining
the
that.
systems now,
Mm-hmm.
is everything within consensus. Some of the realizations for this, especially when you have people that have gone through spiritual emergency, and there's a lot of wonderful resources. You should add links to Katie Mottram's work, Emerging
Mm-hmm.
Proud. Phil Borges has a film called Crazy Wise. Daniel Ingram has this whole institute that is really looking at reshaping. And there are a lot of people that are working in this mental health area, and realizing that the mental health crisis is actually kind of this spiritual, for a subset of people, it's a spiritual
Yes,
emergency situation. Um,
absolutely.
and Yeah, and
To
so
give to,
so
mhm.
yeah, go ahead.
To give this a little bit of context as well on a more macro level, I would say that we are, given that the way we've developed our consciousness is within this, exactly within the range that you speak about with experiences. It's an endless feedback loop of what previously how we've been conditioned. So in order to actually break out of it, given, let's say, there's certain issues, certain problems we have with our continued existence as humanity, certain intractable conflicts, all of that can be met in a way, but the only way to kind of move that forward, and the most efficient, you can also say, is actually to come from this other place, the place that is decoupled from
Well,
from
so the
the
issue right
past.
now is that right now society doesn't understand this, right? And
Exactly,
part of it
exactly. And
too is that if you've got someone that's been through an awakening, you can kind of talk to them, and you can, just hearing and communicating, you can kind of tell whether they've been through it or not, and how far they got with it and everything too. But if you have someone that's never been through the experience, nothing you say to them is going to give them the experience. Even if they've
mhm.
done psychedelics and everything, oh, it's like they think they know, but they don't really. It's not
No,
generated
not yet.
endogenously, and everything.
Hmm.
And so part of, a lot of people are trying to kind of change the masses and everything. But for me right now, it's like, can we identify and recognize these people and build
Right.
community among these people that have been through this process, and then really develop process communities and infrastructure to help midwife other people going through the process, so they don't have to go through the pain of spending
Hmm.
months in a psych ward, and then on pharmaceuticals for
Well,
many years and everything.
that's also the point I'm trying to make, is that also, given, if we need to come up with solutions that are not from the old model. And this way, because there already are a lot of people who have gone through awakening experiences, they're just right now either feeling very lost because they don't have the support system that you mentioned, right? And you yourself have gone through that process. A lot of us have gone through some version of that. And to create, which I know you're about to share, which I'm very excited for you to do so, is that you have um, these projects that you're doing that are actually creating systems, support systems, and actually ways for people to go through this process safely, supported, and also to be able to combine it into their own business entrepreneurship, in a way that then is able to help them through this greater process, which actually helps all of us, the rest of us. It doesn't have to be, we're not talking about being evangelical. We're not talking about having to convince someone of anything, but there are already an incredible amount of people. They just need, I think there's needs to be, in a way, hate to use this word, but it's kind of like proof of concept for the others who don't necessarily maybe agree or see it that way, and for this to actually happen.
Or at least a straw man structure to frame it and understand it a bit
Exactly,
better.
to frame it. Exactly. We need that
And
framing.
so for me personally, I'm not interested in, changing the worldviews of other people and everything, because those
Right.
systems are always going to be there, and they have to,
Yes.
because you have to go through
Mm-hmm.
this process of birth through to catching up with the modern world, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that, although as broken as it is, people will continue to develop and to work on that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but among those people, from the consensus reality people to the outlier people, is to really look at
Mm-hmm.
things from the perspective of personal development, and then work
Mm-hmm.
out these systems where kind of money and power and all of this other stuff is still kind of within this consensus reality, the real world, as you're conditioned, towards.
Mm-hmm.
But then kind of beyond that, especially, this critical thing of realizing, not conceptually, not being taught conceptually, but knowing experientially that
Very important.
there are bigger forces at work.
Mm-hmm.
God, the universe, or whatever, or 大自然 or nature has a
Mm-hmm.
plan, and to be able to feel that and be connected to it in an experiential way, and know that experientially rather than conceptually.
Yes, thank you for
Uh,
clarifying that. It's really, really critical
yeah,
difference.
because
Absolutely. Yeah.
in the development, is I can try to teach you
Mm-hmm.
this, but then it's all a conceptual understanding within a mental framework, versus looking at the metaphysics of, as you try to do something, how is the reality and the universe responding. And you'll
Mm-hmm.
notice certain things happen very fluidly and effortlessly, other things, no matter how hard you try, it just doesn't happen. And for me at least, where you're going to really bump into this is this stage 2 to stage 3 process, where you're kind of going all in on one thing, and then you're pushing really hard to try to make this happen. And so, and you're seeing this a lot, people that went through kind of the Me Too movement, any kind of thing that you want to change, this is screwed up, I'm going to do something about it, and I'm going to make it my life's mission to do something about that. And you're just kind of priming the rocket right there. And as they push that really hard, they'll either succeed and think it's all them, and then that's your whole Wall Street thing and everything, or ideally you'll crash, because it's just too much, and I
Mm-hmm.
took too much to chew. Or ideally, you go through this and you're open, and you come to these realizations. um, and but
Well,
that's still within the washing machine of
right.
modern society and consensus reality. And so some of these systems that we're doing, mystagogical is
Yes.
this kind of entrepreneurship as a spiritual path, and art transcend, basically working with these outliers, designing programs, sustainable models that work within consensus reality in a sustainable, financially sustainable way. uh, Mystagogical is basically mentoring kind of entrepreneurs, and realizing that whatever you're doing, you're going to be doing a hero's journey, and there's going to follow the monomyth and everything. But then having a network of kind of healers and mystics and people that know this stuff very well in the consensus reality realm to kind of support. And mainly what we do is we kind of run entrepreneurs through a program, give them a framework to understand this, and make them realize that what they're doing is just context for their own personal development, and to start looking at things and really investigating why they're doing what they're doing, and doing the inner work related to this. And then as they
Mm-hmm.
engage, looking at how things play out, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of mentoring them, and as the shadow appears, kind of addressing these things. And so that's kind of this mystagogical, this entrepreneurship as a spiritual path. And then for artists, basically it's a similar program. And the premise is, if you can then shift their consciousness, then their connection to whatever inspires them will increase, and the art that they create will be more profound. And then that will have a bigger impact among
Right. Right.
the masses. And so really, how do we support that and develop that? And so that's kind of, those are some of the programs we're developing related to outliers. And we've been working with a number of I personally, over the last 5 years, have been working with a number of companies kind of in this area. And, one of the ones I was working towards mending was the one that you were involved with Alchemist Kitchen and everything as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so we've been doing this quite a bit with many companies, and I advise a number of companies, and we're building things in that as well too. And even the systems that we're building with this, we're doing kind of in this entrepreneurship as a spiritual path kind of way. And so really working with kind of the emergent
It's
reality,
fascinating.
and using this as a personal process. And then right now, the exciting thing is things are coming together with Art Transcend on the artist side. And so those are programs addressing kind of these outliers of, people on the fringes of consensus reality, the ones that are,
Mm-hmm.
kind of going out there. And then, and so this is mostly left-hand path people, people that are kind of following their bliss. And for right-hand path people, people that are perfectly fine within consensus reality, things still happen. Usually, my parents die, I get divorced, and I lose my job all within like a month or so, and I'm not able to, physiology maintaining homeostasis, which reinforces a mental worldview, which motivates action. This loop is not able to happen, and those fractures can kick someone out as well too.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have this other project called Antarabhav, which is basically building a social fabric network and to support people going through spiritual emergency. And there's Christina Groff, Stan and Christina Groff, this a spiritual emergency, and there are groups that have been in the United States and all around in Europe, UK especially, trying to build these networks to support people going through spiritual emergency. But part of the challenges they've
Incredible.
had is, well, they haven't been able to make it sustainable, because usually a lot of these people going through this process have
Mm-hmm.
no money and no resources.
Mm-hmm.
And and then usually, because in the US, because of lawsuits and everything, they get people that have the degrees and accreditation and all of this stuff. And so
Right.
it's been difficult to support this. But what we found is that when you have people that have been through awakening and have developed gifts, there's this guy Anthony
Mm-hmm.
Lemay and many other people that can do kind of energy healing and do remote things and depossessions, all sorts of these kind of things to help ground someone remotely, not using kind of the Western paradigms, but using these special gifts to help
Mm-hmm.
ground and center. And what we do of cultivating presence, bringing people here, having them understand you know what's coming from thought, and then having another person to be able to just be with them,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of shift them into stillness and into presence, with their presence. um,
Mm-hmm.
and so now what we're finding, especially with with COVID, there's a lot that you can do online, and with a network of healers and mystics, there's a lot that you can do remotely. And so part of Antarabhav is there are three things. One is protocols to help ground people going through spiritual emergency. Number two is to have like a social fabric. So getting volunteers that have been through the
Mm-hmm.
process, like getting healers to donate 2 hours a week and mystics to donate like a day a week of their time to help people that are help midwife people going through this process. And then number three is setting up places around the world in nature with people that have gone through this, that can, people can actually go there and then just almost like a Betty Ford clinic for people going through spiritual emergency. There's a place right now already in Asheville, North Carolina, that's specifically for spiritual emergency, but they haven't been able to make that financially sustainable yet. And so really looking at, and the exciting thing is if you go online and global, with arbitrage, there are a lot of people in India, China, the Philippines. Just like you have these call centers, you can have people that can to help, build a global network to help kind of ground people. And so
Well, how can
usually there's a
someone listening
period.
actually access this?
Well, we're putting all this together right now, and we have
Mm-hmm.
this website that we're developing with a form, and we're looking at processes of vetting people, for this to
Mm-hmm.
be able to hold space and do this kind of work. But usually, generally speaking, there's going to be, for people going through the emergency process, there's going to be like a week to 3 week period where ideally somebody that's been through the process gets to them and kind of gives them tools to ground. And if that doesn't happen, usually a large percentage of them, not all of them, but a large percentage of them, end up in a psych ward and everything. But then even there,
Mm.
it's difficult because their family doesn't understand. No one else has been through
Yeah.
this, and
Well,
it's
because
it's
you're out of
it's
consensus
very,
reality. How can you? Yeah.
yeah. And so
I
so
mean,
there's a pure process of kind of initially, this emergency situation,
mm-hmm,
and then stabilizing them, because once they come out, they're
mm-hmm.
very sensitive, and a lot of people may need, they need a place to live, food, because through my process,
Yes.
I realized, I had met Jesus, and I embodied Jesus, and I gave everything away, and I know the Lord will provide for, they were in this kind of high mania state, and they weren't able to self-regulate, and all of this stuff was coming to them. And so a lot of them may need a place to stay, food and
Right.
everything. And so there's that stabilization part, and then after that, doing the inner work, grounding them, and then making them sustainable in some way, either moving to an intentional community, or
Mm-hmm.
somewhere near nature, or hopefully parents or friends or something like that, or finding a job that can earn a living so that they can support
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and put food on the table and find a place to stay. A lot of them end up with special needs kids, or becoming
Mm-hmm.
coaches and counselors because of these intuitive gifts that they develop, or being empathic and everything, through this process. And then and then if they can then become sustainable, then the next stage is for them to thrive, and to be able to
Mm-hmm.
then work with people, maybe that this happened to them 20, 30 years ago, and they have gifts, and then they can then guide these people,
Mentor
to
and
kind
guide.
of
Mm-hmm.
develop their gifts and everything. And so this global decentralized modern mystery school, uh, which we're calling Fusukoi now, named after the
Mm-hmm.
ancient Greeks that were investigating nature from their experience and trying to come up with language for that. And we have Project Fusukoi, where we're getting people with interesting abilities, non-ordinary abilities, and then we're getting scientists and academics that have been through the process, that have research labs, to try to
It's amazing.
understand how to study this, and trying to build global community around this. And a lot of like China and India, Neidan and
Mm-hmm.
all of these Eastern
Mm-hmm.
practices are untapped in terms of these Taoists and everything. And so we're able to find these people and then bring in kind of Western scientific methodologies to try to understand that. And so those are these systems that I was talking about. I'll be spending the rest of my life kind of working on and building. But these are, I feel,
It's a
are
good thing to
things
spend time on.
that humanity needs, but modern society just doesn't really understand. Even something like
Yes.
qi, doing qigong for
Mm-hmm.
20, you can kind of feel qi. But right now, there's a guy, Shen Lin at UC Irvine. If you look at electromagnetics or photons, machines can't measure this at all. And then according to Western science too, acupuncture, which seems to work for a lot of people and
Well,
has
some
done
machines can.
miracles.
Some machines can, actually, depending.
Well,
Some machines can.
not the ones that are recognized by Western science.
Right. Well, you and I should talk, actually, because my Qigong master was also recruited and they did all these experiments with him. And he actually showed me the results. So I'll
Well, I
share
know
that with
Shen
you.
Lin. Shen Lin
Yeah.
is going with China and everything, and he hasn't. I brought my mom over to be studied, and he couldn't
This
measure
is
anything.
real.
And so there is that. But even like
Yeah.
meridians in acupuncture right now from the West, that's pseudoscience too. There's no measurement. There's nothing that can be measured in terms
Well,
of
according to
meridians and everything.
the existing, right.
Yeah,
Well,
but
but there
but
are,
so
but
we're doing
yes, I hear
we're
you.
doing a lot with intersubjective work now too. It may not be something that machines can measure, but it's something that another consciousness can measure. And so doing things like
Mm-hmm.
hyperscanning, where you're measuring EEG across two different people, and designing
Right.
experiments using the intersubjective second person research methodologies is something that we're kind of looking at developing and everything too. Among this kind of building this community. And again, it's one of these things where ideally people that have kind of been through this experience and have kind of a different form of understanding, um, to to really kind of design these
Speaking
experiments. And
speaking of which, yeah.
what I mean by that is a lot of these things require an amount of inner work. And the metaphor here
Hmm.
is it's like jazz. If you get four top jazz musicians, people that have meditated for a long period of time and kind of open their channels and all this other stuff, and you put them in a room to play music, you're going to get amazing jazz. Even though they've never met each other. But if you get like four crappy jazz musicians or one person that just learned their instrument last week, and you put them in the same room to do the same experiment, you're going to get crappy jazz. And so
Hmm.
how do we kind of design these experiments that require us to be able to somehow measure the degree of inner work that people have done? But
So
the neat thing
that
about
leads
it is
me.
that once you have it physiological, arguably if you're within the body is objective and it's measurable. And once you have something that's objective and measurable, you can build the science around it.
Well, that was my question actually, because you work a lot with AI and VR and AR, I believe. And, through your work with all your video game design, digital entertainment, all of that, and there's so much available now in terms of transformative tech, trans tech. There's a whole school that's all about consciousness hacking, which is using real-time biometric data, quantitative self, a lot of these ways that we can actually have objective measurements of experiences. And are you also applying that to help and support people facilitate this transformation?
Yeah, and the challenge there is you can give people an experience and you
Mm-hmm.
can make them aware, the conscious mind aware, through, like, I even wear a watch that has my heart rate and everything, and breaths and sleep, and all of this is giving you more data and everything. But it's really about kind of the integration of all of that.
Right, 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 right. So
And
you're
and
saying you
it's a
do both?
moving to an experiential thing. And so a lot of things that I did with you this morning is, just,
Mm-hmm.
when you're present versus when you're in thought, and even looking at communication is what's happening when we're communicating, and how you're
Mm-hmm.
breathing, and your breath relates to your emotional state. And it turns out, when you're present, you can be aware of your breath and how you're breathing, and you can actually do a body scan. And so you can be aware of what's around you and how your body feels. And if you bring yourself fully here, you can feel, you can be aware, but you can't think, and your mind is clear. Versus when you think about something, you're not really connected to breath or body and everything. And so even as you're engaging people, how are you engaging them? And so with video games and interactive media, I can create a stimuli, but then by observing the conscious decisions you make and how your physiology responds, I can start developing an understanding of your worldview, and, you know, potentially early traumas and everything, and work towards remedies,
It's
in
amazing.
that.
That's amazing. Amazing. How can someone learn more about your work at the moment? I know you're still putting everything together, but how
Yeah.
can someone follow your work and where should we go and
Just, we're still putting
websites
it all
or
together, but
yeah.
yeah.
Are you
Can
on
contact
social
me, I
media?
suppose. Yeah, I'm on social media and can provide, I guess, some links and everything.
No,
Um,
I'll definitely put that in the notes for sure. And we can
yeah.
also go to your website, ginoyu.com.
Yeah, and that's all going to be redone, and we've got, all
Mm-hmm.
these different projects. We have the domain names and everything, and
Yeah.
but it's right now, we're still in COVID, which is kind of nice, so we have more time. But right
Mm-hmm.
now, I that thing that I sent you. So we have a write up of all this stuff, but actually that write up that I sent you and sent
Mm-hmm.
to a couple other people, I actually started it mainly writing it for me, just to how it,
Thank
because
you for
I
sharing
spend
that
a lot
again,
of
by the
time
way. Mm-hmm.
explaining it, and, can I kind of write it down, and everything. And some of these projects are moving forward right now, like right now, especially Art Transcend. There's this whole NFT movement right now, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really exciting how technology is taking off in this. And right now with COVID, there are all of these, land development projects all around the world, looking at building intentional communities and places, to hold
Absolutely.
retreats, and just really, really, and all this regenerative economy stuff and everything. It's a
Yes, so
really
exciting.
exciting time to be around. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Thank you so much, Gino. Thank you for sharing all the amazing and extraordinary work that you're doing, and would love to support in any way. And I'll definitely share the links that you mentioned, and also, make sure people can find you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
All right. Thanks a lot. Great work.